Hi, my name is Jeph, and my favorite thing is storytelling and tabletop role-playing games.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and we get recommendations without using an algorithm. Today's guest and I checked my email. We have been trying to connect since 2023, possibly. Our mutual friend, Jessie Dukes, has wanted this guest on the podcast since 2023 and finally made the introduction in, I'm looking at my email, February?
Yeah.
And it is early November 2024. We're making it happen. So I have the host of the Big Campaign podcast, Jeph Wilkinson. Jeph, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
Well, we were talking before we hit record. Adjusted for the election, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's been a real shit week. But I am excited to get to talk to you about some stuff that you love. And remember that there is joy to be found and work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll start with just a little chit chat. How do you know our friend Jessie Dukes from Upper Middlebrow podcast?
2 years ago, when I started Big Campaign Stories with a bunch of my friends, we made a Twitter account, or the X as it is now, and started putting ourselves out there, right? Let's make a silly little podcast with my buddies and see if people want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Because our setting is very much a corporate dystopia with its own rich oligarchs and fascist undertones, it appealed very much to Jessie Dukes because their own podcast was starting dealing with Snow Crash and Neil Stephenson. And part of our description for ours is very much kind of a Blade Runner-esque setting, or Snow Crash with magic.
Nice.
And so they reached out after hearing a few episodes, and we did some promo swaps, but I started listening to them as well, and that just kind of got me into listening to some fun takes on books that I hadn't touched in a long while.
Yeah, I, same way, found Jessie and Upper Middlebrow and Chris on Twitter. I think someone retweeted it into my feed, and they were like, Leah, you got to get on this podcast. They're talking about Snow Crash, and of course that author's name is just out of my brain.
Neil Stephenson.
Neil Stephenson. Good grief. Because I had maybe 8 years ago just gone through it was a year where I read like a bunch of Neil Stephenson, and it was just like all dystopia all the time. And that's maybe the last year I read a ton of books. So I started listening, and at the time Jessie was based in Chicago, so we were able to meet in person once before he left on his grand adventure, and he's been on the podcast a couple times, and we've got a crossover episode coming soon about robot friends.
All right.
Yeah. So tell me about Big Campaign.
Big Campaign was just started originally, 20 some odd years ago, when all my nerd friends and I found tabletop role-playing games. A friend brought over the 3.0 D&D manual and said, hey, let's get this started. Let's start playing this game. And as we all kind of got into it, everybody wanted to run their own games and do things. But we had one game that was called the Big Campaign, which is when everybody was there.
Mm-hmm.
And then when some people couldn't make it, everybody had their own side games.
Nice.
Over the years, it just kind of kept going because I'm a huge Dune nerd.
Yep.
And
which is an endless... Dune is an endless source material.
Yeah, I grew up with Dune. It's, my dad's favorite book. I've read it multiple times in a couple different languages. And I was like, cool. So I can just tell a story for as long as I want or as short as I want. And then when we ended that, my friends all really enjoyed it. So they said, hey, do you want to do another one? And so we took the world that they had played in the first time, and then we adjusted it and kept going. And now we're on the 8th iteration.
Wow.
22 years later, starting from very generic fantasy, elves, dwarves, and guy has big sword, to finally sorcerers with cell phones and, religious armies dealing with corporate takeovers and things like that.
And is your podcast a subset of that crew, or is it a different crew?
It is a subset of that crew. I picked several players that have been playing with me since the very beginning, and a couple of the newer friends I've made in the last decade or so that just were a lot of fun. at tabletop games and took to it very naturally. Also, a bunch of big readers, which I find lends itself pretty well for.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we formed that. So it's a sub-story kind of taking place in the 7th iteration that's more urban, more city set. We played one version of it where everyone kind of got to do their Marvel superheroes kind of thing, where you're playing characters that work for like Men in Black or Hellboy, like those secret organizations. You fight against horrific monsters from outer space. You're trying to save the world while trying not to get involved in geopolitics. But the podcast takes place on the ground level. So these guys are repo men and they're trying to collect for corporations to pay off their debts, while in the background, technically they've already played through all this. In the background, all their hero stuff happens.
Okay. And are you the DM for the podcast? Okay.
Yeah.
The DM and editor and producer?
Yes.
Yeah.
I know from listening to a few of your episodes, you like to time travel a bit.
I do.
And so I thought of two very important, time travel moments for me.
Great. Let's get into it.
The first one being when I was about 9 or 10, we had come over from Portugal. We're staying with my grandmother and my aunt is there. My aunt was the nerd in the family. So she had all these cool books that I'd never seen before of like cryptids. Like you could just read a whole book on Bigfoot, Loch Ness monsters, fairies. And I thought she was like the coolest person in the world because she could draw comic books. And she was I think she's 14 years older than me. So I was like, whoa, she's 24 and I'm like 10. Like this is the coolest grown-up I've ever met. So while I would annoy her by sitting in her room and looking through cryptid books, I found her Vampire the Masquerade books. And I'd never seen, I guess, make-believe have rules before. And it was like, whoa, this is cool. Like, what does all this mean? She kind of explained like, oh, you spend these points, you get these powers. And me and my friends, we all play vampires. And she kind of told me the story of that. And it blew my mind. It was the coolest thing I'd ever kind of thought you could do.
So is Vampire the Masquerade, it's a tabletop RPG?
It's a very different from D&D. It's a lot more removed from the idea of combat. It's a lot more about role-playing your interview with a vampire. You have different vampire clans and different schools or powers that go with it, but it's a lot more talky based.
And at this point have you met Dungeons and Dragons yet?
I have not.
Okay.
Yeah, at this point, I wouldn't meet Dungeons and Dragons till I was about 20.
Okay.
1920. And this was my first run-in with this, and I was like, wow, this is so cool. And then life goes on. We moved again, and we traveled quite a bit. And then it wouldn't be, my next time travel spot would, funny enough, be in 96 when we finally settled into the Seattle area, where a next-door neighbor having a garage sale had a first edition D&D box. And I opened it up and looked in it, and there was a golden D20 in there. And I was like, I've never seen a dice with more than 6 sides.
Oh, wow.
What the heck is this? And I asked the guy if I could buy it for $0.25. He said, you can just have it. You can just take the whole box.
Get it out of my house.
Yeah. And of course, it was like some adventure path, which means it's already pre-written. It's not rules or anything. It's already a story made.
Yeah.
So it didn't teach me how to play or anything, but it was fun to read through and wonder, what do all these weird numbers mean?
Right. Because at that point, you're not making a character sheet. You're just reading a story of Dungeons and Dragons and casually rolling a die because it feels good.
Yeah, exactly. Like you look over and they say D20 here and you're like, I've got one of those.
Yeah.
I don't know what it does, but neat.
Nice.
And then it wouldn't be that was 96. So it wouldn't be till 6 years later. My friend brings over D&D and I was like, oh shit, I have something for this. And weirdly, I moved about 20 times before I was 18.
Oh my gosh.
But somehow the D20 was with me the whole time.
Yeah.
And it is still, actually, funny enough, right here on my desk.
Amazing.
The corners are all rounded. The numbers are falling off. But it's just cool. But so those were the weird moments that led to when I finally got to try this.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, cool. I think I can do this.
That's fun. So you're 20. Are you in college? You're getting together with a group of friends from college, or how do you put together that first group of people?
The first group of people was just friends from high school. A lot of my friends were ahead of me in years in high school, and I dropped out early to go to college. And so all of us had more time, and we all had our first apartments and things like that. So it's like all of us in our early 20s. How much Mountain Dew, pizza, and video games do you want to play? And then someone's like, what if we play D&D instead?
Yeah. Round it out a little bit.
Yeah. And it sucked us all in clearly for now 2 decades.
Yeah. In high school, my brother's 6 years older than me. And so he, I think for sure, was playing Dungeons and Dragons with people. And I think they sold it at the record store we went to growing up. Like, Dungeons and Dragons was very familiar. It was around. And then briefly played, I mean, like maybe 2 nights, and then I like went to marching band. I think like Parasite in the 90s, early 90s.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It was or maybe it was called Pandemic. It was something spreading through the city, either a parasite or an illness. I think that's what it was called. My sister listened, she might remember. And then I tried again in my early 20s. A friend of mine got together a group of us to play D&D, and he did the maps, and he was our dungeon master. And at the time I had 3 jobs.
Oh,
so I was a waitress, and I worked at Walmart, and I worked at the Chamber of Commerce. So we would start playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I would fall asleep every single time and have the best dreams. Because he would narrate, they would all play, and occasionally they'd wake me up to roll, but I would dream whatever they were doing, I dreamt it. So I have really warm memories of it, but I was not successful.
That's funny. I think every group had the person who worked too much, who wanted to be there, that always fell asleep. Like, there was always like, oh, leave that spot open on the couch for them because they'll be here in an hour, and when they get here, they might not last long, and that's fine.
Yeah.
They're here.
Yeah. So you start playing with that second group, and I'm trying to think, what is the time in your life when you had, so you said like we've got the big campaign, that's the one that's lasted all this time. And then you do subsets. How many parallel games do you have going at any time?
Like, ones that I run, I usually have 2 or 3.
Okay.
And then I have a couple friends who run games as well that I just play in. Because I do have one friend who just loves to change systems. Their love of TTRPGs is just how creative everybody gets with how they make rules and stories. Like, how do you get the feel of these kind of games when everybody's looking at the same math rocks and playing make-believe together?
Right. Nice. So I love that. I love it as because there's such this will make sense. Do you watch The Golden Bachelor or The Golden Bachelorette?
I do not. I haven't seen those.
Okay. So it's from, I don't watch the Bachelor franchise, but they just did a season, The Golden Bachelorette, where it was a bunch of men in their 60s and 70s in the house together.
Okay.
And they had the most fun they had. You know, they're all divorced or widowed and have just been lonely. And they just had their reunion episode a couple nights ago, The Men Tell All. And it was like, instead of being mad at each other because they were competing over the love of a woman, they were just like, hey, remember all the jokes we made about farting? Hey, remember like how much fun we had in the pool, or when this person cooked the guacamole, or when this person, like, it was like a true cure for loneliness for these men. And I think that I love that you have like 20 years of playing tabletop RPGs with friends, because it's just so important to have something to root a friendship and relationships in over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially thinking about those older men, like, having that friend group or having people around is very important mentally for all of us.
Yeah.
And I can definitely say that over the years, having good friends that, you know, though we've joined militaries or started families or moved across countries or out in the world and all that, we still hop on Discord and we still roll some dice and we make dumb jokes and just kind of have fun being kind of dumb again.
Yeah.
Dumb without consequence, I guess I want to say. Like, you just kind of be silly and everyone laughs.
Nice. Do you have any in-person games, or are they mostly remote Discord games?
They're all remote now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
COVID, of course, kind of knocked that out for everyone, but not gonna lie, it also became pretty cool to be able to do digital games, because friends that now, you know, I have friends in Cleveland and friends in Illinois and in North Ontario that they can play now that they couldn't before. Because now it's like, oh, okay, yeah, let's if you guys don't mind the time difference, let's hop on and roll some dice. And
Nice.
yeah, and I enjoy that opportunity was made for us.
Yeah.
But I do miss, sitting around in person. It's always cool to cook a frozen pizza, bring out a 6-pack of beer, and
Yeah.
roll on a big whiteboard and keep track of dumb numbers.
What I think is really interesting about people who take the role of DM is that you have a structure provided to you by a publisher, and then you work within the confines of that. Like if you're doing D&D,
Mm-hmm.
have you gotten to a place where you work outside of you don't work with published stories anymore? Or do you always work within the confines of a published rules of a world?
Oh, no. So yes, at this point, almost everything we all kind of do is a little bit homebrewed. It's all
Okay.
we all make it ourselves. We make our own settings and things like that because we've, as a group, gone beyond kind of the stories that are kind of prepackaged.
Yeah.
Not to say those adventure paths are bad. I think they're a really cool idea. They help a lot of people get into the game, and they show structure for people that may not know how to do a narrative structure.
Yeah.
Because DMing is a different skill than like writing a story.
Sure.
Because technically all my characters actually have agency that I can't control, and they will come up with their own everything.
Yep.
And so we found that a lot of those rules are great to use as like skeleton or to build from.
Yeah.
But it's just way more fun once you just kind of let your brain go crazy and start making stuff up.
Yeah. Do you have a design? Now, there's a lot on your website. You've got the world of big campaign stories. So, you explain the races, the locations, the corporations, the gods. Do you have the desire or goal to publish beyond? I'm not belittling what you've done. Do you ever lay awake at night and think about getting like a traditional games publisher to publish your adventures?
No, I think making a podcast and sharing with people is the fun I kind of want of like,
Yeah.
of sharing those stories, because stories are any kind of, I don't know, stories are the things I really love. And I think TTRPGs really let people, regardless of language, culture, everything, kind of make stories
Yeah.
that are unique, that they can have those personal moments and memories with their friends and family and whatnot. So I've never thought of it in the idea of like, there should be, put it all in a book. It's something like if somebody said, hey, can you put this all in a book? It would be a crazy amount of work. It'd be kind of weird.
Yeah.
But it's never really crossed my mind in that fashion. Because even when I'm not playing, I still like just making stuff up. For our third iteration of the game, or at the end of the second iteration of the game, I think it was 2004, and there was worries about conflict and the geopolitical conflict of the world. And I just kind of said, you know what? I'm going to go take a break. And I'd saved up a bunch of money, and I just kind of took off for Europe. And I kind of spent 2 years just wandering around. And
Wow.
I'm going to use Citizens, so I was able to just stop and work wherever I kind of got wherever I wanted, and just spent some time. But the whole time while I'm riding trains through Austria or hanging out in Morocco or whatever, I had my drawing pad and I drew all my characters, and I started planning for my next big campaign. I was like, I'll eventually get back to America, and I'll call my friends up and be like, hey, you want to geek out again?
Nice.
And yeah, when I finally did, they were all super excited, and they were not ready for the amount of nerd I guess I'd put into this over that time.
You're like, I spent a lot of time alone in Europe. I've got stories for you.
Yeah. Oddly enough, a lot of castles in both this game and there.
So you mentioned you grew up in Portugal,
Mhm.
immigrated here. Your dad is an ESL teacher. So you grew up around languages.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever done this in Portuguese, or is this an English only pursuit for you?
So this is English only, though I do like to use Portuguese whenever halflings talk. Whenever halflings speak in their native language,
Yep.
then I use Portuguese for them. But I found that there's a large TTRPG scene in Brazil, but there's not one in Portugal. Last time I went back, I couldn't find a single book at any of the bookstores.
Huh.
I asked a couple people, I was like, hey, do you guys I thought I'd buy some dice for my friends. And it's like, hey, do you guys have, 20-sided dice of this? And they gave me that weird look of like, I can check with my manager.
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay. No worries.
Cool.
But, yeah. Nope. I'm just a weird dude. Don't mind me.
That's really interesting. Like what countries have the communities and which ones don't.
Yeah. Because I mean, I've run into a lot of German TTRPG people, and there's obviously a big market with like all the Norwegian and Swedish games that are coming out. So it's clearly there. And there's a lot of cool stuff coming out of Brazil, which cheers, mostly a Portuguese, like, what is it? I kind of say they speak the American Portuguese, and Portuguese is kind of the British version.
Yeah.
Stodgy.
I studied it. My minor was Spanish in college. All my professors were from Murcia in Spain. So I had a very good I had that lisp. Yeah. And I studied abroad in Argentina.
Okay.
So the same, like, I was like, maybe I don't speak Spanish at all. Maybe I haven't been studying it for 5 years. So the regional accents, like you think accents only exist in like your first language. And then you start traveling and you're like, oh shit. Yeah. Every language has regional accents. And it's wild.
Yeah. Yes. It's definitely it's a shocker because it makes, I don't know, I felt like when that hit me, it made the world feel like really big, but also kind of turned every country into, I don't want to use the word like normal, but like, oh, okay. So everybody has this issue.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, this is, so I could probably get away if I make a joke here, like, not like those people up north, right? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, Northerners talk like this, or people from this island do this. And you're like, cool. Everybody has that joke.
I had a friend when I was in Argentina, Sebastian, who when you grow up in Argentina, at least this was the case in the 90s, when you learned English, you either learned the Queen's English or you learned American English. And so he grew up learning to talk like a British person. And when he finally got to study abroad, he went to Alabama. And when I met him, he had come back from studying abroad and he could do a perfect British accent and a perfect like Alabama accent. And it was amazing. So I love it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's a spread.
Yeah. Languages are weird. What? Have you been to Brazil?
I have not. I've not actually been to anything south of Texas.
Yeah.
And I want to. It seems neat, but I always feel like I always want to see countries, I guess, that I want to see more countries that I can't understand the language. Mm-hmm. Because Portuguese, I had to study enough Spanish so I can converse in Spanish if I need to.
Yeah.
But Portuguese is my main thing. So it's like, I'm more interested in like, I'd love to go see Southeast Asia or more places, more places in the Eastern Bloc. I think I've been through like Poland and Czech Republic.
Yeah.
I'd love to be further in like Bulgaria or Lithuania and stuff like that.
Yeah. I've been to Poland. The night I went on a group trip. They taught us a couple words to try and be polite. I retained nothing. And it was strangely a wonderful trip. And there's still a vodka that I buy that we had there. It's a buffalo grass vodka.
Oh.
It has like one piece of grass in the bottle, and it's a really mellow vodka. Like it's a sipping vodka, which I didn't actually knew existed.
Yeah. I don't think anybody did in their 20s.
No. Yeah. No. So you said, like I asked people, I have this little survey when they schedule to come on the podcast and like, what is it that you want to talk about? And you said TTRPGs and storytelling. When you say that, are you thinking, does storytelling for you go beyond tabletop RPGs?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of like my traveling gave me a lot of chances to meet a lot of people that you just normally wouldn't. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things in the whole world for that was sitting at bars and just hearing people's stories, right?
Yeah.
And different cultures, different places, and how they try to convey their information, or how you try to get that joke across when you're crossing language barriers in a couple different ways, or even just hearing, what weird stories do you have of your town? What cryptids do you have here? What anything that verbal transmission of moments and how they kind of stick with people. And it's just, I think TTRPGs give us all a great way, and especially for people that don't get out as much, a great way to storytell into things they could not experience. Mm-hmm.
what is one of the wildest local cryptid or like local, like what are some of the wild local stories that still stick with you today?
Oh man, what is it? So it was very choppy then. My sister is German, and her husband is Moroccan,
Mm-hmm.
and her husband really loved telling stories of just kind of like the ghosts you'd see in the desert and things like that. But if you translated, he would have to speak Arabic to my sister, and my sister, who doesn't really speak English, would take that and use her German to kind of her broken English to kind of give that story to me. And it's just, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories of, the things that are out there and spirits and how you appease them, and this is why you do this thing. And it was just kind of neat.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I heard the same stories from like my African grandparents of, kind of like, oh yeah, no, there's absolutely these monsters near the village, and you had to light a fire at night to make sure that these monsters would know your homes, they wouldn't bother you.
Yeah.
Kind of things. And all those sneak their way into my D&D and all my stories, because it's a really fun way to kind of like not all these stories have a purpose, and they're obviously shared, though we can all look at it now and be like, well, that's kind of weird, you probably don't have ghosts. But if you believe you have ghosts and that removes anxiety and you light that fire and it does what it's supposed to do, it's functionally the same, right?
You may not have ghosts, but you may have. I went to Africa for the first time this summer. So I went to Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Kenya. All countries where elephants just fucking live their life, and all of them don't like people, right? And I can imagine if I grew up somewhere more rural, even in America, like, in Chicago, I have to worry about like squirrels and rabbits and rats, like small mammals. And every once in a while, a coyote sneaks into a Quiznos and it's like a fun day on Twitter. But like when you grow up somewhere where there's like actual wild animals, whether they're cats or elephants or crocodiles, big snakes, great. Tell your kids they're ghosts. Keep them in. If that is scarier than like an elephant, tell them it's a ghost. Light a fire, tell them it's a ghost, go inside.
Yeah, like the purpose of the story can always remain regardless of kind of the actors in it.
Yeah. One of the things I like to do when I'm traveling, because my dad is a house painter and a contractor, so that is where I assume this comes from, is I like to see how they're getting things done in other countries. Like, how are they carrying bricks, carrying sand, like construction? I like to just like sit at a cafe and watch construction in another country that may or may not have the same safety standards that we say we do. And it's like giant IKEA bags of sand on a pulley up a rickety ladder, or, like the moving trucks that are just ladders to go up to windows in like Amsterdam or Paris or Jerusalem, or it's like, oh no, you can't carry the boxes through the stairs inside. You got to take them on a ladder outside. Like, I love all that stuff.
That stuff it's all very funny. That I spent a summer working at the Faro airport in South Portugal as kind of I got hired on as like a worker at the airport, but really I worked for just this giant European company called Vedeka. And we all wore kind of like Venture Bros henchman shirts or outfits. Like, we all had speed suits with a big V on the back. And it was definitely interesting working in that kind of like that layout environment of like, it's been 2 hours. Everybody just takes a half-hour coffee break.
Right.
But then you'd also have somebody be like, hey, we have another site that we're supposed to be at. The guy who's supposed to work the caterpillar that digs up the dirt didn't show. So we're going to send 5 of you out there with shovels, move a pile of dirt for 8 hours. And it's like, okay.
All
right.
And
so we got on a bus and we went to the site and we moved dirt in 100-degree weather for 8 hours. And it's kind of like, it's fun because just this is how it kind of has to get done, right? Like, you don't have the machines and you don't have the things. People, you just make people do it.
Yeah.
And those moments, right? They become fun because you have a group of people you can kind of talk with at like any table. And so you tell stories about like, oh, tell me your best drinking story. Tell me your best blah, blah, blah. And no matter who, or not no matter, almost everybody wants to tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah. I trying to think if I heard any really good stories while there were 4 of us that went on this trip to Africa together. I mean, for me, when we got to Kenya, we stayed in Nairobi. And I don't know if you've been to Nairobi. And there are no stoplights. There are no street signs. There are traffic patterns and there are lines down the middle of the road, but there's nothing beyond that. Sometimes there's roundabouts. The only traffic lights I saw were at a toll booth. So they'd stop and pay your toll. But other than that, I was with one of my dear friends, her husband's in the State Department. So every few years they move and they drive on the other side of the road in Nairobi than we do here. And there's just no signs. And I was like, how did you learn how to drive in this? And she said after about 3 months, she stopped gasping every time they made a right turn, which was cross traffic. She's like, once I stopped grabbing the car and gasping and praying every time I turned, I knew it was time I could start learning to drive here. And it was just wild because I've been in the UK, I've been in countries where they drive on the other side of the road, and it's always, your brain is always a little bit wait, what's happening? What's happening? But taking away all stoplights and street signs was wild.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of parts of Portugal that are like that.
Mm-hmm.
That they just, your friend lives here because that's where their farm is.
Yeah.
If you asked me for directions there, I couldn't give it to you. I just know, you take a right at this bar, you're going to go up this road until you pass the olive tree where you caught that chameleon one time. Mm-hmm. And then you take a left. And then once you get to this spot, you're probably pretty close. And it's it's interesting because we think those things are important, but they kind of aren't.
Right.
Right? We believe in the sacred painted lines and all these rules. But if you don't have those, then everybody's kind of driving with the same idea of self-preservation.
Yeah.
Right? There's not that person who just, I had a free right and somebody runs a light.
Yep.
And we get mad at them because didn't you see the thing? You aren't supposed to go now.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. We still hit. Versus if you're going to make that right across incoming traffic in Nairobi, the other people who see you doing that are also probably going to be well, I don't want to run into another car.
Yeah. So this is just super jumping around. Do you have any times over the last 20 years with your campaign where your players did something that you were completely unprepared? Either they rolled a natural 20 or they just revolted against whatever it was you thought was going to happen. And do you have any? You're laughing, so maybe you have one or two of those.
Yeah, I do have a couple. One of my absolute favorite ones, and I think Chris Bagg might have brought this up on your episode with him.
Yeah.
In the beginning there, that the first game we ran, very elves and dwarves, and players got stronger and stronger, and they beat up bigger things. They finally fought a big dragon, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they put out a new book called the Epic Level Handbook, which said, "Hey, do you want your game to go past level 20? And here's all the rules to just play forever if you want."
Okay.
And, turned all my friends hey, do you guys want to still keep playing these characters? And they were unanimous, yes, absolutely. So I create a super over-the-top planar war, giant, flaming undead minotaurs riding double-headed red dragons craziness. And players are having a blast. And eventually I was like, cool, I need something terrifying because they're chewing through everything.
Yeah.
I was like, boom, sentient black hole that is here to effectively erase reality.
Wow.
And I was like, I got him. This is going to be awesome. And, reading all the rules on this monster, I'm like, oh, cool. It's, arrows don't work against it because it's a black hole. Magic doesn't work on it because it's a black hole. And, the players are trying all the things that players do to figure out, how do we fight this? How do we do this? How do we handle this? The fighter character who's been playing the whole time was like, well, I think I'm going to rip it in half. And I was like, okay, sure. Go for it, buddy. What do you got? He's like, all right. So the wizard flies me over there. I'm going to land on the black hole. I'm going to try to break it. And I was like, okay, cool. But there's this giant number you have to roll to not get melted because you're landing on a black hole, which he passed the number. So I was like, okay, sure. Your guy's standing on the black hole. Now you're at the void of entropy and infinity. And he's like, cool, I'm going to reach down and I have this one power where it says I can break an object and I get a bonus to it. And I made the mistake of not reading all the way until the end of the monster.
Uh-huh.
Because the very end of the monster is the living black hole is created by God. So by that means it's actually a construct. It's not a living thing. It's a death robot made by gods, which means it can be broken if you can break this number.
Okay.
And so in that moment, that horror goes across my face, and I think my player realized there's actually a chance of this. And I was like, oh God, no, I didn't plan for this. And what is it? He used he used an ability that we'd all kind of forgotten. This said basically like once a day, if he's really angry and he's trying to break something, he can roll that 20 on it. It just treat it as a natural 20. And he had a couple other things. And so he's like, cool, I got a 58 on my strength to break this black hole. And I'm looking at this book and it says, to break that, you need a 56.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, all right, how do I describe this to you all? Victor jumps on top of this black hole and just breaks it like a jawbreaker. I mean, like he just tore a watermelon in half, but it's the size of a house and is a black hole. I mean, I don't know, guys.
Yeah.
He does it. And all of them, of course, cheer and everyone's happy. And they're like, that was such a fun session. And I still remember them leaving and just being like, fuck. Like, oh, damn it.
What's left?
Yeah, like, what the hell do I do now?
Right. What did you do? How did you recover?
That's where I was like, cool. Come up. I think that was the night I was like, I'm gonna start planning for next game, and we're just gonna wind this one down. You guys are gods. You'll be gods that people can worship in the next game, but you'll make new characters.
Yeah.
I think we've reached the natural end to this without me just saying rocks fall, everyone dies.
Amazing. Yeah, it's fun. I love that you also remembered it as crystal clearly as someone remembers a movie.
Yeah, and that's the fun of those TTRPGs is that pretty much any of the players there will probably describe it like that as well.
Yeah.
As that's, stuck in their memories also.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of love it, right? Like that's not something I would watch. I mean, not something you normally watch in a movie or a show.
Yeah.
And it's just born out of craziness and like, oh, how the hell do I even challenge these guys? Let's just do something weird. And they still find a way to beat it, and it becomes more fun because I didn't think they could. And so that really also helped me as a DM kind of go like, oh yeah, and there's a lot of people who can feel very adversarial in this role. That's not me. This is awesome. I love seeing them accomplish just the craziest things because all their brains work different than mine. So I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, I would just be like, well, it's a black hole. If you get close to it, you're sucked in. End of, like, that's what a black hole is in my head. Like, that is how I understand it because that's how I understood it when I was 7.
Yeah, I mean, that's
right.
Yeah, every sci-fi movie I've seen now still tells me that.
Right.
But, I guess what? Now I think about, like, I guess in modern times now, I'm sure there's an anime out there where somebody can punch a black hole.
Right.
I'm sure there's a Dragon Ball Z for that somewhere.
I'm curious, Jeph, like, how do you bring people in who have never played before? Like, what's your prescription? I like time travel. I like prescriptions.
So that's part of that is also why we kept restarting the worlds.
Yeah.
After we finished the black hole thing and all that, my players, they had so much fun. They told their friends. So the second one we ran was still, of course, called Big Campaign. It was just Big Campaign 2. But this time I had like 11 players as opposed to the first time I had 7.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, so I got 4 new people. Hey, let's start you on the basics of like how to kind of make a character, but mostly kind of talk to people like, hey, I like to think of, did you come from books or video games? Like, what's your base mindset coming into a role-playing game? Because if it's books, those people generally are really good at descriptions and think about their character, and they get stuck on rules, right? Oh, I want to do this cool thing. Like, I want to grab the one ring and not be corrupted. Well, you got to make a save for it. And if you fail, you're just corrupted. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. Sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
And some people don't like that. But then the video game people will be like, hey, I just beat up this monster. Can I eat it and get all my hit points back? And you're like, well, no, that's not how food works.
Right.
And they end up being the people who lend themselves to rules really well, but they have a hard time with the open sandboxness of, you're in a city. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And they're looking for the thing to click, or they're looking for tell me where the story goes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you are the story. You need to, like, we're all pulling the same cart together. I'm just, setting the beat or setting the tone.
Yeah. I'm sure I also talked about this on my episode with Chris. There's an episode of Newcomers, which is a podcast with Nicole Byer and Lauren Lapkus, 2 comedians, 2 improvisers. And on newcomers, every season they watch a series they've never seen before.
Mhm.
So the first season is all of Star Wars, or it's 20 episodes of Star Wars. Second season is Lord of the Rings. And it turns out there's not really 20 episodes of podcasting to do about Lord of the Rings. If you're doing one per movie, and then they're like, and the animated show, and the radio play, and fan fiction. They really stretched it. But they brought in a DM who they did a Lord of the Rings, like a 1-episode
Oh, fun.
little adventure. And because they're improvisers, they were so good at it. Once they understood, like, oh, this is improv, but instead of acting it out on stage, I'm telling you all the things I want to do.
Mhm.
And it's a really fun episode of two people who have never done role playing in a game, taking like the world of Lord of the Rings, which they've just gotten very familiar with, and then learning about rolling a die and how to, like, it was a really fun episode.
I actually did put that one on my listen list from your episode, so I
Yeah.
haven't got to it yet, but that but yeah, bringing new people in is always, I always like to find out kind of where they're coming from, but then next is just kind of starting small with how do they like to play make believe? Do they want that grand adventure, or are you wanting to start problems in the bar? Are you wanting to
Mhm.
hit on NPCs? Are you like, what do you know about this stuff, and how do you want to do that? And then you can start bringing in dice and the random element to kind of show them, hey, here's how this kind of goes. If you big numbers, good number generally,
Yeah.
unless for some reason it's not, but different systems, of course. Yeah. Different
Yeah.
systems have different rules on it. Do you like that number or not? But I feel like everybody has that ability to play,
Mm-hmm.
and D&D may not be the right game. Like, we play Pathfinder, which is a variation of D&D that was made during a bunch of weird corporate decisions that happened to Wizards of the Coast, who owns TSR. But there's so many cool games out there for, if that doesn't work, that you can have somebody play that they might just fall in love with.
Yeah.
For my aunt, it was Vampire. And though I've played that, as I'm now playing as an adult, it's like, not really my game.
Yeah.
But it got my brain going when I was a kid. It was so cool.
Does she know that she's part of your origin story?
She does. She does. We laugh about that because her older brother, my uncle, also played D&D, but back then it not being as cool, right?
Sure.
The younger aunt got to be part of that Gen X group that
Yep.
those things were neat, but my uncle being older and playing in the 70s, he's like, oh, you got picked on a lot, so I didn't tell people I played.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until he heard that I was playing a lot, he's like, I used to play that game. It's like, it's cool now. You can just say that out loud. Like,
Yeah.
no one's going to give you crap for it.
Yeah. I was just listening to an episode of High and Mighty with John Gabris, which makes now 2 episodes in a row where I've talked about listening to his podcast with someone who is just releasing a card game, like a role-playing game of cards. So I think it's sort of in the world of Magic the Gathering.
Mm.
But the end of the episode was both of them talking about how fun it is now that you can that so many people play different types of video games, tabletop games, RPGs, in a, I guess, post Baldur's Gate 3 world. Everybody gets to be really out and proud about doing this. Like, it doesn't carry the shame that we put on it for people in the 70s and 80s.
And I was born in 84, so I grew up in a fairly nerd-friendly world, but it's also like a lot of my traveling meant growing up, I didn't have a lot of friends, so I read a lot of books. But even then, like, books were hard to kind of talk to people about sometimes. Like, if they aren't Dune, or they aren't,
Right.
The Foundation trilogy, or those big ones, Zelazny's The Amber House and things like that. It was always cool going to those used bookstores, and you could find all these crazy stories for small books that nobody knew, and you could read about them. And it isn't until, we get the internet that now you can talk to people about those really
Right.
niche things that caught your eye and took your, made your imagination go crazy when you were young. And now it's really fun to be an adult, and you can be like, oh, hey, do you remember this book?
Mm-hmm.
And somebody else did, and they made a TTRPG out of it now. And you're like, well, that's crazy.
That's
Like,
awesome. Is there a fictional world that you have yet to explore that you're like kind of, so you said for a while you were doing a lot of castles because you'd been around Europe, and now you're doing this dystopian corporate espionage. Do you have on the horizon other places you want to take your group, or do you just really like to live in the world you're in and then take a break and come back?
Yeah, normally it's live and take back. Recently though, it's really what the brainworm has really gotten into my head of I want to destroy my world and I want to do a post-apocalyptic game
Yeah.
where, history doesn't matter. There can be ruins to the old cities that they've once played in, but it'd be fun just to wipe that slate.
Yeah.
Like, how do you, take the story to its potential conclusion, or even how do you rebuild again, right? And that becomes a whole new fun place to think about stuff. And how do you do that? So that's what's been floating in the back of my head of like, how do I kind of destroy the world and not bug anybody?
Right. You're like, look, I tried once, but you broke the black hole. Is there anything else about storytelling? I mean, there's so much more. Storytelling and tabletop RPGs that if you don't get to share it, you're going to walk away and be like, why didn't I say that?
I guess I would just say that I feel like everybody should at least try it once. It's, it's been awesome watching friends, teach their kids, play those games with their kids, right? Even if the kids end up not liking it, that's still a fun moment.
Yeah.
And we're seeing even people my age now, like their dads saying like, oh yeah, before you were born, I used to play, but we didn't have time when we had kids. And it's like, cool, 65-year-old dude, get back in here, man. Grab those dice. Let's get it. And it's great seeing the reaction of pretty much anybody. These are games for everyone. And luckily we live in a world now with like, especially podcasts, and the actual play scene is very large, where it's very cool to listen to group like, I listen very much, very much like the Clash of Crits podcast, which is, an all black cast. And so it's like, cool. It's very fun to listen to them, or the Rainbow Dice Club, which is an all queer cast, the three women that are also the players and the GMs at the same time, and they rotate between each other.
Yeah.
And it's just super neat because like I never thought about doing that, and it's so cool to kind of hear that work and to see it's a little bit like how we talked about like the accents. Like everywhere has accents, and it's kind of neat to see everywhere has these kind of ideas for stories that everybody kind of wants to tell.
Right. Nice. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to find a group to join? Like, do you go to your comic book store? Like, I could imagine my friend Terry, who's been on a few times, he has a comic book store in Chicago, and I feel like he could probably be a Dungeons and Dragons matchmaker and get people placed into groups. But are there other tips for people who are like, I want to try this? And like, how do you find people?
I mean, if I were to look for a group now, like if I didn't have the friend group I have, I would say finding Discords finding like actual play podcasts that you like to listen to and joining their communities, because most communities have a looking for group or have people reaching out. Yeah, a lot of those groups have ways for people to communicate with like-minded, either politically or culturally or that sort of thing, so you can explore those spaces in a safer way. I'm sure comic book shops are great as well. I mean, I'm a big Magic nerd. I'm a big D&D nerd, these things, but I also know that those places can become very insular accidentally.
Yeah.
Because change to groups sometimes can be hard for people, and they're happy in their community. And so, like, if you have a good place nearby that you can do that, always recommend, right? In person, it's a very interesting experience. It's a lot of fun to play in person. But if you are looking to get into that, then yeah, Discords, and I know like the Wizards of the Coast websites, Paizo, a lot of the creator websites have forums for that. But Discords are always kind of where I kind of recommend people to start, because you can see how the culture and the people interact before you interact with like, hey, I'd like to go play make-believe with you all.
I think that's great. I am deeply involved in a number of podcast communities. So the top two are How Did This Get Made and Doughboys. Like, those are the Discords I'm in. I was the founder of Dax Shepard's official fan group for his podcast many years ago, but I backed out of that when I was like, oh, I am not a typical fan. You ladies have an energy that's very different than mine. But absolutely, podcast fan communities are some of the best people you'll find. And I think like the Discord I've met, which is the Doughboys Discord, I've met such good people. And I absolutely could find people to game with there. Like, that's a great suggestion. And I think if you go to the source of a real play podcast and then go to their Discord, you're absolutely going to find, like, if you like the vibe on the podcast, hopefully you'll like the vibe in the Discord.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, sorry, that that terrible urge to keep explaining when we agree.
Well, Jeph, where can people find you on the internet? Do you want to be found?
Yeah, I mean, easiest spot, Big Campaign Podcast on Twitter at Big Campaign Pod. We do have a link tree there, but we have a Discord that a lot of us are in there. Jesse's in there, Chris is in there. We all nerd out and talk politics and books and dice rolling and stuff. And that's probably one of the best places. Otherwise, I mean, we're on Instagram, we're on all the usual spots, but you can hear us anywhere that podcast is normally found.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a delight. Nice to talk about something fun in a real shit week.
Yes. No, for your December listeners. Hey, I hope December's really cool. I hope we all enjoy it and we all have a great holiday season.
Yep.
For us in the current moment, it's kind of a rough week.
Yeah. You can find Finding Favorites anywhere you find podcasts. If you see us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate 5 stars, give us a thumbs up, tell your friends about us, subscribe, set it to auto download. It really helps the podcast, which is edited and engineered by Rob Abrazado. I'm your host, Leah Jones. And that's it. Thank you so much, Jeph.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a blast.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.